Let's jump into our topic for today. Grief. Today's subject is grief. And I'm going to continue today to share the wisdom offered in the workshop Loss, Grief, and Timeless Love. And I'll start off with a quip from the comedian Sparrow. They write, in the late 1980s, the philosopher Joseph Campbell advised us to follow our bliss. I have always followed my bliss. I've just never caught up with it. We want to catch up with our happiness. And we can by following the trail, this fertile trail of our grief and our loss. It doesn't feel intuitive at first, but that's where we look. So I want to start with a short recap from last week. We talked about loss and how loss is entangled with love. The only way you feel loss is if you love something or you value something. Loss is this pain of separation from the things that we love, the things that we value. And a list of things, since it's not always apparent, the things we can lose, obviously a loss of a loved one, the loss of health, cognitive abilities, the loss of trust, status, meaningful work, loss of dreams, loss of innocence, possessions, purpose. And anticipated loss is a very important one. Anticipated loss, the things that we have that we know we won't have forever. So we talked about that, and we talked about grief, this feeling that accompanies loss. That's the feeling. And we have this need as humans to process it. We have to metabolize the grief. And as Francis Weller, the grief expert Francis Weller writes, our call is to be apprentices of sorrow. That's our work in following our bliss. He writes, I'm not sure how or when I began my apprenticeship with sorrow. I do know that it was my gateway back into the breathing, animate world. It was through the dark waters of grief that I came to touch my unlived life. There's some strange intimacy between grief and aliveness, some sacred exchange between what feels unbearable and what is most exquisitely alive. Through this, I've come to have a lasting faith in grief. Faith in grief. Our culture does not support faith in grief. It's something to be fixed rather than experienced. And some families are better at grieving, some are worse. But the greater culture that we swim around in is not attuned to it. It's not normal in our culture to cry. It's not a norm. We have in our family a cousin who grew up in Iran, and he cries quickly and easily. Around the time of his brother's death last year, he warned us about this. We were in his company. He said, I know it's unusual in America to cry openly, but this is what we do in Iran, so don't worry. It's how we process things. He cried during our conversations together, and it did seem very natural to him. He wasn't embarrassed or apologetic at all. His tears would well up and then passed, and we'd move on with our conversation. The first step in processing our grief is recognizing the pain and reassuring ourselves, this matters, this hurts, and this matters. This matters. And we reassure ourselves that nothing is wrong. Things might be wrong with the world, things might be wrong with our lives, but nothing is wrong with having a painful feeling. And our natural reactions are tears or a furrowed brow or a downturned mouth. Allowing these physical events, not having embarrassment. So this processing of grief is a somatic experience. It's a physical experience that you have to be willing to have over and over. You have to be willing to have that somatic experience. I want to share an experience from our teacher that really touched me because it speaks to kind of the way that I sometimes move around the world. Our teacher described a time in her life when she woke up to the power of allowing herself and her body to feel her loss. She had been lonely and was wandering around her home, perhaps, in a constricted state of loneliness. She was trying all the usual fixes, controlling, distracting, managing, anesthetizing, forgetting. Then something in her reminded her to lean into experience. Stay with the physical sensations, confirming that she was feeling loss. As she stayed with it, she felt a clutching in her chest and face, a squeezing, constriction, actual pain. Her body was not comfortable. She let each wave pass through her and waited for the next one. She kept on doing this, staying bravely with her bottomless pit of sadness and loneliness. Part of her was able to keep curiosity about the somatic experience. After some time of this practice, she started to feel a space opening up. The more she allowed, the bigger the space got. The grief was still there, but it wasn't overwhelming her anymore because she had opened up enough space around it, and she could hold it now instead of being crushed by it. If you mix this is a thing we talk about a lot in this practice, if you mix a teaspoonful of salt into a glass of water, you can't drink it. It's too much. It's poison. If you put the same spoon of salt into a bathtub, it's so diluted that it's palatable. That's the kind of space that we open when we allow grief to have its expression. From comedian Woody Allen. There are two elderly women at a Catskill mountain resort, and one of them says, "Boy, the food at this place is really terrible." And the other one says, "Yeah, I know, in such small portions." "Well," Allen says, "that's essentially how I feel about life, full of loneliness and misery and suffering and unhappiness, and it's all over much too quickly." One way we waste our precious time is by what's called taking false refuge. And false refuge basically is these harmful shortcuts that we take to avoid the grief. So a false refuge is like this habit, some habit of consolation that we offer ourselves to provide this temporary relief. And it can come in the form of, an addiction or obsession, spending hours on the internet, for example, retail therapy, ordering from Amazon, some way that we try to control our world, this control. It's like a way of numbing out. My own way of numbing, I have plenty of my own. We all have our ways. Mine include redecorating spaces. So basically every doctor's office I've ever been to has been fully redecorated. Making elaborate to-do lists, reorganizing closets, eating chocolate. We try to stay in control so as to avoid loss. But most of it's not in control. Because if it's not in your control, because if it was, we would all be perfectly happy by now if we could control everything. So trying to manage and control your experience is what's called a false refuge. A false refuge. We feel like we're taking refuge, but it's a way of doing it that avoids this mystery of life and death. We're running away from the mystery of life and death. Weller writes, bringing death out of the shadow is our spiritual responsibility, our sacred duty. By so doing, we may be able to feel our desire for life once again and remember who we are, where we belong, and what is sacred. So false refuges, these are these strategies for brief temporary relief. And here are the ways that we do that, the way we contract from reality. The first false refuge is denial. You get the bad news and you think it's a joke. You don't believe it. I can't believe they're gone. This is very normal. And eventually it becomes a habit, which is where the danger comes. A more common occurrence is just talking around the difficult issues. Talking around it. When my father was ill with terminal brain cancer, he was very much there still. And I remember it was always good to be together with him. But I can be honest, we never really discussed the real issue. I didn't even know what the real issue was. And we were both being brave for each other. And neither of us, looking back, I understand, neither of us had any tools to be tender with his losses as his disease was progressing. Our false refuge was that if we deny this, maybe it won't hurt so much. My mom recalls how a rabbi came to speak to my father. He was an atheist, but it was part of his hospice, and he wanted to speak. And Mom recalls that the two of them were behind closed doors for a long time. And afterwards, she said he was much more at peace. She believed that having spoken to someone wise to the spiritual mystery of life and death allowed him some form of release. When I was recalling this story myself, I happened to be in a coffee shop and my eyes filled up with tears. And the knee-jerk response inside of me, I heard it. Oh, don't cry in public. Go quick, get your tissues. But I allowed it to flow. I let the tears. This is a process of metabolizing my own grief. And I honor it. Grief is a friend. And that friend is not to be denied. It needs to come regularly. There's nothing wrong with that. The next false refuge is anger. Anger comes in the form of blaming, judging, hostility. A line from Nicole Kidman in the movie The Interpreter, which I haven't seen, it's on my watch list. Vengeance is a lazy form of grief. Vengeance is a lazy form of grief. One reason we might decide to do something hurtful, wrong, or bad, or lash out at others is that it's a defensive stance, covering these deeper feelings of vulnerability and hurt. There's also self-blame. Maybe if I had only done this, not done that. All these responses are very, very natural. So just to say, we're not wrong for having these reactions, but just knowing that they're false refuge. The next false refuge is bargaining. So that's the idea that something bad is happening to me because I did something wrong, or something good can happen if I do something right. And I want to see if we have time. Yeah, we have time for this funny joke on bargaining. One of these longer jokes. Little Johnny came to his mother as she was making dinner. His birthday was coming up, and he thought this was a good time to tell his mother that he wanted a bike for his birthday. Unfortunately, little Johnny was a bit of a troublemaker, and it wasn't certain he would get his bike. But his mother wanted him to reflect on his behavior, so she asked him to write a letter to God and tell him why he thought he deserved a bike for his birthday. Little Johnny went to his room and sat down to write God a letter. Dear God, I've been a very good boy this year, and I would like a bike for my birthday. Your friend, Johnny. But he knew this wasn't true, so he tore up the letter and started over. Letter 2. Dear God, I've been an okay boy this year. I still would really like a bike for my birthday. Johnny. He knew he could not send this letter either, so he wrote a third letter. God, I know I haven't been a good boy this year. I'm very sorry. I'll be a good boy if you just send me a bike for my birthday. Please. Thank you, Johnny. Johnny knew even if this was true, this letter wasn't going to get him a bike either. So he went downstairs and told his mom that he wanted to go to church. His mother thought her plan had worked and told him to go to church, happy at the change in her troubled son. Johnny walked to the church, went in, and went up to the altar. He looked around to see if anyone was there, and seeing no one, he bent down and picked up the statue of Mary, slipped it in his pocket, and ran home. He shut the door to his room and sat down once again to write his letter to God. Letter 4. God, I've kidnapped your mama. If you want to see her again, send me the bike. Oh. The false refuge, the last false refuge is depression. We avoid our grief and loss by shutting down. This can happen right away or gradually, and it comes in the form of apathy or powerlessness, helplessness. So these false refuges lead to chronic anxiety, right? If we continue, as I said before, it's very natural. These also are known as the stages of grief. So it's very natural to flow through. But when we habitually make this our place to be, it leads to chronic anxiety. Because if the grief isn't processed, it's not actually disappearing, but it's mutating and taking on a life of its own. So eventually, we want to move into acceptance by meeting the grief over and over. And we meet the grief not as part of a bargain. So we're not saying, hey, if I am going to just feel this right now for a minute, then I want to be done with it. It's not like that. It's feeling it so that it becomes really an honored part of who you are. And in that way, eventually we open up space around it. We have this honored place in our heart. I'll conclude with a quote from Weller and then lead us in a reflection that we'll take into our breakout room. He writes, "An apprenticeship with sorrow offers us the chance to build our capacity to stay present when the intense feelings of grief arise. Through meaningful rituals, a community of friends, time in solitude, and effective practices that help us stretch into our bigger selves, we're offered the opportunity to develop a living relationship with loss. We can recover our faith in grief that recognizes that grief is not here to take us hostage, but instead to reshape us in some fundamental way, to help us become our mature selves, capable of living in that creative tension between grief and gratitude." So we ask ourselves, what am I unwilling to feel? And we notice what's happening when the pain is present. We name it, we allow it, we honor it.